you talked about Katie Scheid, who's a local New Englander now, I think based in Europe, somewhere in the
Yeah.
Alps, but her roots in the White Mountains. Can you talk a bit about the northern New England trail running scene? Because
Yeah.
one of the long-standing threads in this podcast is how there's this weird divide between East and West Coast running. East
Yeah.
Coast running is this big kind of black box, this mystery. It doesn't have as
Yeah.
much media coverage and athletes and fanfare. And
Yeah.
just I'd love to know like what you think is cool about it, why it is the way it is, how it compares to the
Yeah.
West. Just take this wherever you want to go with it.
Yeah. Yeah. So off the top of my head, like one of the major reasons I compete in the Northeast is like I just couldn't hang at a flat race. Like I'm too big. I think my hips are too wide. I've got too much like muscle mass I can't get rid of as much as I try. As a side note, like when I was training to go into the military, I weighed like 160 pounds.
Yeah.
I'm 6'1", went from 160, I went all the way up to 220. And then when I started running, I cut all the way back down to 180. And anytime like weight is important, but to like anyone out there training and like thinking about restricting calories to cut that extra weight and come down, I can tell you that every single time I have tried to do that to come below 180, I've gotten injured like immediately. So like my biggest thing now is to just like eat as much as possible, recover as much as possible. And like, that's the most effective strategy for me. And if I try to come down any lighter, I get injured, but just a totally random.
No, that's great. That's great. Well, we're going to save that for another podcast. Another good talking point there. But okay, so you're saying that like that, but so, that body type serves you well in a rugged environment.
So. Because in the Northeast, things are just, it's I feel like trail running on the West Coast, as it's currently kind of highlighted in major races, is so runnable. It's almost like really hilly road running as far as like the technicality and the kind of physicality you need for it. I think you could probably train entirely on really steep streets and then go and run a course like in California that's like super runnable, single track.
Sonoma, Western states, stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas like the East Coast, it's like an entirely different sport in my mind. Like things are so steep and so technical. I looked at the top 5 steepest climbs on the PCT, and I see, this is something someone could easily look up, but I think the steepest climb didn't even exceed 20% on the entire PCT. And like, there are sections of the AT that are like in excess of 40%. Like there's many of them.
Hey, just an example on the Pemi, that descent off Garfield is like a waterfall.
Absurd. Yeah.
There's literally like down climbing a waterfall. Yeah.
Yeah. The trail goes down. It's kind of horrifying. It's just like a jumble of rocks with like water running through it.
Zero margin for error.
Yeah. And it's like very exciting. The technicality is like incredibly engaging. And it's super cool. And I think also cool about the New England scene is just kind of the history. The Crawford Path, I think, is like the oldest walking path in the United States. The Crawford Path goes from the Highland Center, I guess, Crawford Notch.
On the AT.
Washington. Yeah. Yep. On the AT. Or maybe it goes the entire Prezzies. Yeah, just like the history is fantastic, especially in the whites with the huts. It's just so cool. And there's just like a really warm, kind of really nice culture there that I really love. And the trails, because they weren't graded or maintained for kind of like pack animal travel, are just they're just straight up the fall line. And they're kind of, in a lot of ways, I think probably the route that the first ascensionists and kind of early hikers took, where it's like, hey, look, like it's clear through this super dense brush just going up the stream. So we're just going to hack the trees back from the stream, and we're just going to go straight up the fall line up this hill. And it's just, it's really cool, really, really engaging experience. And I think one of the best part is like every course is completely different. So just because you're like fast on the Prezi, like you couldn't just show up the next day at the Great Range or a month later at the Great Range Traverse, having never seen it, and just onsite it. Like that's just not going to work.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of kind of training you have to do for each route, and every time you kind of put down is like entirely unique. And each effort is really unique, which is exciting. Whereas opposed to like, if you have a runnable course that's 15 miles and 5,000 feet of gain and it's like super runnable, then the physicality is like basically going to be the same, and you could kind of just like go and just like on site these efforts with a GPX. But out there, it's really unique and engaging. And I think especially with fires out west and with climate change, I think the center of the gravity of the sport is just going to start to shift to the East Coast. One big problem on the East Coast is just there's so much private land, there's so much protected land. It's just much harder to organize a race out there. So I think that's what's kind of maybe depressed the racing scene a little bit. But yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, no, we talk about climate change. I think Northern New England is this great climate resilience area. I think it's at least going to become more hospitable, especially through the winter as the years go by. I was just talking with my girlfriend. Well, we've been talking about it a lot, getting property up in that like Lincoln, New Hampshire, Gorham, New Hampshire, Bethel, Maine, Burlington, Vermont area, that whole corridor. I mean, there's just great mountains. And I think it'll be a great place to train in the long run and just to compete. But why don't you think the scene has built up a larger race presence there?
I'm not really sure. I think, you have more, it's possible because the trails are just so technical. I don't think they lend as well to kind of the normal kind of like collegiate scene. It doesn't really make as much sense to go from kind of collegiate running or marathon road running on a, and then going to like running those trails. It's not terribly easy, where I think it's a little bit easier to make that switch to more technical runnable stuff. I think that's potentially one thing. I think just kind of, just totally off the top of my head, there's more running brands I feel like have their kind of their training camps kind of out west. Certainly that might be just because there's more trail running out west, but even on the kind of the road scene, Nike up in Oregon and Hoka down in Arizona. And I think maybe, just the whole center of gravity of the whole kind of like hiking scene, I think is more hiking and mountaineering is more just kind of West Coast focused. And I think people may just be a little bit more on the median person might be a little bit more outdoor orientated, and there might just be a little bit more interest in trail running out there. But there's a huge trail scene in the Northeast, so that really does not explain it.
Well,
I have no clue.
Yeah. Well, I love this conversation thread anytime I have it, because like I'm looking at I host this podcast on this platform called Buzzsprout, and it shows you a global map of where the listeners are. And like 85% of it is in like the Mountain West California. Like I have like 2 listeners in Asia, like 3 in New England. So like anytime I can paint the picture of like what I think is the coolest place for trail and mountain running in the US, I do. And I think that like for any hipsters out there that want to go settle a new trail running location, go to like northern New England, go to like Lincoln, New Hampshire, and set up shop.
Go to the Adirondacks if you really want to.
The Adirondacks too. Yeah. Like Lake Placid area is.
Yeah. It's just absolutely absurd. And like, even beyond the whites, I think in technicality, just on average, just crazy terrain up there. And I think people also discount the East Coast scene because they see mountains that are 5,000-6,000 feet high, but it's like not that different than
not
Salt Lake. The prominence is probably
the vertical relief is the same.
Yeah, it's the same.
It's sea level to 6,000 instead of 4,000 to 10,000.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like when
the majesty is there.
What's that?
The majesty is still there.
Yeah. Like when I did that that 100-miler in the whites, like the climb from Crawford Notch up to Washington on the AT is brutal. There's some undulation to it, but it's top of the AT is at like 6.2, and you start at like 1,000, and with like 2,000 feet of elevation change, it's like 7,000 feet in 12 miles. Just brutal. I was able, that 100-miler, 100 miles on the AT in the whites, like with no like out and backs and peak tagging and everything, was just as it is 34,000 feet a gain. Like you don't have to do anything extra.
So about what, 70 grand of total change?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. It's fantastic. Yeah. And it like, that's the artery and what you're getting. And like, you could tack on extra stuff and you could easily make a 100-miler on trail, probably without even repeating any stuff, and like crack 50,000 feet a gain, which is just absurd. So
there are a couple race directors, I think, in like the Finger Lakes region of New York
yeah,
that do a great job of representing that scene. But I don't think like, and again, I've only seen the course, so I can't say anything about the event. I've never thought that like the Vermont 100, which I think a lot of people might be
yeah,
familiar with when they think of New England, I don't think that that is representative at all of
no.
what is possible in that area. I think
In
there,
ponds.
yeah, yeah,
I was just going to say, I think Vermont 100 has about 16,000 feet of gain, and it's a lot of fire road.
a lot
And
of
I
fire
think
road.
possibly that might just be informed by like what's on the West Coast. Who know, like, I mean, I think some of it's protections, but I think some of it is, hey, look, like, the people want to race runnable courses.
Yeah,
If you want to have a big race in the US, it's usually a runnable course. And so I think that kind of like informs the scene on the East Coast, whereas like the East Coast should stick to, what the East Coast does best, which is like super technical trails. I think Manitou's Revenge
yes,
in the Catskills, like 54 miles. I think it's got 15,000 feet of gain. That looks like a pretty good one. Like half of it's on the Devil's Path.
yep.